Good afternoon. Welcome to the open plenary session of the NLADA 2021 conference. My name is Radia Thomas. On behalf of the NLADA Board of Directors, I welcome all of you. I want to start by extending a heartfelt thanks to our premier sponsor, the NLADA Insurance Program, and to our platinum sponsor, Mutual of America. I also want to acknowledge that NLADA's insurance program is sponsoring the Facebook Live segment of this ceremony. And with that, we are happy to have our very own Joanne Wallace, our esteemed immediate past president, nearby as the new president, CEO, and board chair of the NLADA insurance program, the Service Corporation. And this afternoon, you are in for a treat as we officially welcome our new president and CEO, April Frazier-Kamara. I have to tell you that undergoing a nationwide executive search in the middle of a pandemic was no easy feat. But our succession committee, along with our search firm, Isaacs and Miller, certainly steered us in the right direction. As you know, NLADA has long focused on racial justice as an essential component of equal justice. However, the pandemic shined a light on the realities in our unequal system. And the events in summer of 2020 inspired a new era of racial reckoning, leading us to acknowledge that we needed to take even bolder, more courageous actions to advance racial equity. It was then that the board of directors formed a racial justice task force. And I want to thank board member Neilani Fujimori-Kayana for her leadership of the Strategic Issues Committee, which launched the task force, and board member Stan Herman, who chaired the task force. When the task force delivered its recommendations, we knew we needed a compassionate, strategic, courageous leader to help us implement them. April Frazier-Kamara has been a champion for equal justice for 2 decades. A graduate of Howard Law School, she worked as a public defender in her hometown of Memphis, Tennessee, and at the Public Defender Service of the District of Columbia before joining NLADA. She has been a part of the NLADA leadership team for the past 5 years, most recently serving as Vice President for Strategic Alliances and Innovation, and before that, Chief of Lifelong Learning. April is a visionary leader who understands the importance of community and how to develop programming and advocacy strategies simultaneously to drive change. She is a co-founder of NLADA's newest section, the Black Public Defender Association, which elevates the voice of Black public defenders who have both lived experience and professional knowledge that informs their work and provides a unique expertise that must be heard. In addition, she was also the 2020 chair of the American Bar Association's influential criminal justice section, where she led a diverse group of stakeholders, prosecutors, defenders, judges, and academics to build consensus and adopt important ABA policy on race equity and prosecution, reparations, abolition of private prisons, and other complex criminal legal issues. For her work, April has become nationally known for her courageous leadership in advancing racial equity. She is the right leader to have at the helm as NLADA implements its Racial Justice Task Force, its recommendations, and supports our community of advocates, that's all of you, to propel the nation closer to fulfilling the promise of equal justice for all. So at this time, Please join me in a very warm welcome for our new NLADA President and CEO, April Frazier Kamara. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Rhodia, for that very kind introduction. And good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to be able to join you virtually today from my home state of Tennessee. I want to give a warm welcome and a sincere thank you to those joining us virtually or those who are joining us this week in Nashville. I want to first acknowledge and thank a few people. First, thank you to the NLADA Board of Directors, and specifically thank you, Rhodia Thomas, for your leadership as our board chair, for all of the hard work of the board in ensuring the success of NLADA in our next chapter. Also, I want to personally thank our local host committee, the civil legal aid and defender members from Nashville and the greater Tennessee area. Kathy Clayton, Cindy Eddingoff, Brenda House, Martisa Johnson, Michelle Johnson, Ann Pruitt, and Darkenya Waller. And of course, thank you to the amazing staff at NLADA. You have been amazing during this transition period, and specifically during this time of pulling together our first ever hybrid conference. And I also want to say thank you to my family. My youngest daughter, Nyla, who is 6 years old, reminded me last week that I forgot to mention her in my remarks. So on today, I want to say thank you to Nyla and Layla, my husband, Jabril, and my mother, Velma, who supports me in all that I do. And lastly, but certainly not least, Joanne Wallace, my friend and mentor. Congratulations on your new role as president and CEO of our crucial business partner, the NLADA Insurance Program Service Corporation. Thank you for your hard work in paving the road for leaders of color like me and so many others. So our theme this year is redefining justice. And so you'll notice throughout this week, all of our sessions and topics will expand on this important theme. As you know, we're living through a once-in-a-generation moment where we are being summoned to answer the call. I grew up here in Tennessee, not far in a small town in West Tennessee called Atoka. And like many parts of America, my hometown struggled with our past and struggled to confront the legacy of slavery and white supremacy. But in my small town, there was also an amazing sense of hope and resilience that prevailed at the end of the day. I was fortunate to be raised in a strong family that offered a counterbalance to many of the challenges that I faced. In my family, we were taught that we had the power to change the world. And one of my greatest teachers was my grandfather, David Weaver, who only had a third grade education, but he was relentless in pursuing his dreams for himself and our family. And so I grew up doing homework in this amazing home library that was built by my grandfather. And some of you all may have seen it this week on social media because I did a post of me and my sisters and my mother in that library. And this was a space that was built by my grandfather in his home, despite the fact that he could barely read himself. He actually collected books and brought them home to us from a scrapyard where he worked every day. And he would bring them home and he would add books to the collection. And it was one of my favorite places to be as a child. And in this library, there was a framed picture of the Emancipation Proclamation. It sat at the top of the bookshelf. And as a young child, I didn't fully understand what it meant. But on today, it's very clear to me. While my grandfather was forced to drop out of school in the third grade to help take care of his family, He understood the power of equity and equality, and he also understood the power of education. My grandfather, he was a key figure in my life. He showed me and my sisters and my cousins and the rest of my family what courage looked like on a daily basis when he regularly experienced acts of racism. I watched him. I watched how he handled painful situations with grace, patience, and perseverance. And these experiences shaped me and drove me to be the courageous lawyer and advocate that you see today. And now I'm so proud to be the leader of an organization that promotes courageous and outspoken acts that make our world more just. There is no other national organization that can have the impact that NLADA can, the collective impact that you, each of you, can have on moving this country forward. And we're at a pivotal point in our history. We've experienced an awakening. In May of 2020, a large part of our country finally said, that's enough. We see the harm from racism and white supremacy in our communities every day, and we want it to end. And if you have children like mine, or if you have grandchildren, nieces, nephews, kids in your neighborhood, you understand the importance of ending racial injustice in our lifetime. There is no true equal access to justice without true racial equity in our country. That's why I'm laser focused on being relentless about this imperative issue. Just as we are addressing climate change as if we have no other choice, we will need to address racial inequity in this country head on. So who's with me? Many of you joined us last week for the launch of our new racial equity initiative. This initiative is definitely the legacy that I want to create for NLADA. This initiative is definitely the legacy that I want to create with each of you. And it is our time collectively to move the needle on racial equity across the board. We need to share resources, tools, ideas, and also strengthen our tenacity through partnerships with the private sector. And guess what? Companies and law firms are getting on board, as you heard last week. But I need all of you all, everyone in this virtual room, you know that we have to do it collectively together. We can never achieve the true mission of the organization, equal access to justice, without addressing this systemic issue first. So this is my vision moving forward. I see NLADA leading by example, rooted in racial equity, continuously striving to be an anti-racist organizational model for our members. And I plan to start internally, to start at home, for us to undertake an organizational evaluation, to get a baseline to see where we are as an organization, to evaluate our practices and traditions, and to look at how we can make decisions together and share power. I want to ensure that as an organization, we value all voices and opinions, and we use equitable practices and processes to achieve our goals. And I commit to you that I will be transparent about our journey towards becoming an anti-racist organization. This work requires courage and vulnerability. We will make mistakes. We will not always get it right, but I will share with you whatever we learn to help strengthen your work and your organization. And hopefully together we can achieve our goal. And equally important, I see us advancing and serving our client community, elevating and centering their voices in everything that we do. When we focus on our clients, we are reminded daily of their struggles and what's needed to help them achieve their goals. And when we do that, we are truly mission driven. Only then will we be able to proudly hold up our stars and stripes, honoring our ancestors to achieve that dream that we long for, an America with equity and justice for all. So thank you. Now it is my honor to be able to introduce Joanne Wallace. So many of you know Joanne needs no introduction. Joanne is a friend to this community and a leader. But today she comes to you in her new role as president and CEO and board chair of the NLADA Insurance Program Service Corporation. If you all could give Joanne an applause in our chat menu. As you know, she has given NLADA 20 years of service in fighting for equal justice. And I know I speak for all of us when we say, thank you, Joanne, for all that you have given to this organization. Joanne's leadership in the equal justice community spans decades, and her advocacy career includes the work as a public defender before joining NLADA. And she was the founder of the American Council of Chief Defenders. The Obama White House recognized Joanne as a champion of change for improving access to quality legal representation. And she was named a champion of change again this year by Pathfinders for Peaceful, Just, and Inclusive Societies for bringing together a cross-sector of collaborators to advance justice and equity. So without further ado, I would like to welcome Joanne to the stage, and I'm so excited that we'll continue to have Joanne's leadership and she'll remain a part of our community. Joanne.
Thank you, April, for your very kind introduction. And what an exciting vision. Congratulations again to you. I really am looking forward to collaborating with you to advance justice and equity. So I am very pleased this afternoon to greet you in my new role. Good afternoon. Many people have asked me why I chose to become an insurance executive after a lifelong career dedicated to equal justice advocacy. In fact, I see my new role as a different means to the same ends. As a former leader and practitioner in public defense and legal aid offices, I know from my experience the importance of feeling protected, whether it's knowing that your supervisor will have your back as you are in court representing clients as a public defender, and when a judge threatens to hold you in contempt, or whether it's knowing that an attorney of your choosing will fight for you if your leadership or advocacy is challenged. I also know that challenging government policies or business practices that hurt low-income communities, or providing zealous advocacy for someone accused of a serious crime, or stepping out as an advocate against anti-racist policies and practices means taking risks, and each of those acts take courage. As I see it, the insurance program provides resources and protection to help lawyers and leaders who work on behalf of low-income people be the courageous leaders and advocates that they are in advancing justice and equity. As most of you know, the insurance program does this by providing quality insurance products and services at reasonable costs. What you may not be aware of, however, is the role that the program plays as an advocate for members within the insurance industry. Indeed, the insurance program was created to protect members' interests within the industry and to ensure that the program's assets would benefit NLADA's members and support the association's work to expand resources and assist advocates on the front lines. This was only possible, however, after the NLADA leadership waged a successful court battle in the 1990s. Since the Service Corporation's entrance into the market as an independent enterprise, the per attorney insurance costs within our market have decreased by 50%, and the insurance program has provided substantial financial support to NLADA and the membership through sponsorships and many other venues. And we can do more. I am honored to follow in the footsteps of Clint Lyons, the program's founder, and have the opportunity to build on Clint's equal justice legacy and the successful business that the insurance program has become. And by the way, I hope you will be able to join the award ceremony this Thursday to hear about how we will be celebrating Clint's leadership. I'm committed to collaborating with NLADA to increase the services we provide. I look forward to taking a proactive, evidence-based approach to providing you data-informed information, training, and technical assistance to help you reduce loss, lower risk, and promote quality representation for low-income clients. I look forward to working with NLADA to make targeted investments in the advocacy and training that are most important to you. And I'm excited to support NLADA's bold new goals around advancing racial equity. First, however, we want to hear from you. The insurance program provides services exclusively to NLADA members. So in a sense, it's your company. That means you'll hear from me as we work to ensure that the program is your go-to provider and your starting point for all your insurance inquiries and needs, while at the same time is a company that you consider a partner for equal justice. Please also feel free to reach out to me or visit our virtual booth during the conference to talk with other staff members. We look forward to your input and engagement. We are in an extraordinary time when business can have a substantial and lasting impact on social justice policy. Research in the past 2 years has shown that the public has more trust in business leaders than leaders in any other sector. People expect business leaders to step up and speak out on important social issues, and they expect CEOs to fill the void left by a lack of trust in government leaders. I have seen what a difference that leadership makes through NLADA's Corporate Advisory Committee's commitment to civil legal aid and public defense and advocacy before Congress. Much of the focus on the business role in social justice has focused on large corporations, and there is still much more that they can do. But in many places across the globe, small business is what drives the economy. In the United States, small businesses account for approximately 60% of the gross domestic product and contribute significantly to innovation, entrepreneurship, and local economies. Just this morning, a New York Times article reported on a recent survey that was conducted to help answer the question of what factors are most influential in determining how swing voters, who often determine election outcomes, decide which candidate to support. Can you guess what was viewed as the single most positive determinative factor, even across racial lines? The answer, that the candidate is a small business owner. The insurance program can be at the forefront in shaping strategies to harness that collective power in support of access to justice. As NLADA's business partner, the insurance program has the opportunity, and I believe the responsibility, to provide leadership that models the way that business can advance justice and equity. I am pleased and proud to don the hat of an insurance company executive because I know that it will take all sectors collaborating, government, nonprofits, private businesses, to make equal justice a reality. I hope you will become part of the insurance program's growing community so that together we can leverage business sector influence as we provide you with the protection you need to be courageous advocates for social justice and racial equity. So I want to thank Clint for your friendship and mentorship, the Insurance Program Board of Directors for this wonderful opportunity. And thank you all for your courageous advocacy.
Thank you so much, Joanne. Now, we are at the part of the program that I am so excited about. It is my honor to be able to introduce today's keynote speaker, a fellow Tennessean and a personal inspiration to me, the Honorable Bernice Donald. She's a judge on the United States Court of Appeal for the Sixth Circuit. And prior to this appointment, Judge Donald sat on the U.S. District Court for the Western District of Tennessee. Being an African-American woman in the judicial field, she has broken barriers in most of her roles, including being the first to serve as a judge of the U.S. Bankruptcy Court for the Western District of Tennessee, being the first African-American woman. Also being the first African-American woman to serve the Criminal Division Court of General Sessions in Shelby County, and also being the first African-American woman to serve as the secretary of the American Bar Association. Judge Donald was born in DeSoto County, Mississippi, and she's the sixth of 10 children. She was the first generation college graduate and earned her law degree from the University of Memphis. Her career began actually as a civil legal aid and public defender. And she eventually decided to become a judge, in her words, to be in a position of power so she could ensure that others are treated with respect by those in power. She's the recipient of numerous awards, including the ABA Lifetime Liberty Achievement Award, the Margaret Brent Award, the Distinguished Alumni Award from the University of Memphis, and the Martin Luther King Community Service Award. For me personally, as a young girl growing up in Tennessee, she was my role model. She was a real life example of somebody who demonstrated to me that I could achieve the goals of becoming an attorney and having a lasting impact in the legal community. I am so grateful to have her here today as the keynote speaker for my first NLADA annual conference as president and CEO. So please join me in welcoming Judge Bernice Donald.
Thank you, April. Let me make sure that my volume is okay. I often say that sometimes I forget and use my outside voice inside. If you cannot hear me, please let me know. April, congratulations to you on this new leadership position in your life. You have dedicated yourself to uplifting individuals who have been oftentimes denied opportunity, for working toward equal justice, for righting wrongs wherever you find them. And I commend you for that lifelong work. And I commend NLADA for their vision in selecting you, the board rather, for this position. I also want to commend Joanne Wallace for her new position and for the work that you will continue to do. It is my honor to have been invited to be a part of this program and to keynote this Redefining Justice conference. What a novel title, commitment, initiative, and what a time for such a focus. I heard April say that she'll be laser focused on these issues, and I commend her because we know that we have too long neglected these issues, these inequalities, these disparities. We look at the words equal justice, equal opportunity on paper, but we oftentimes only give lip service to them. And we have to stop pretending not to know what we know or see what we see. And we have to understand that if there's ever going to be a change, that change must start with us. I want to take just a couple of moments this morning to share with you some thoughts. But before that, I want to commend some leaders in Tennessee. Cindy Eddinghoff, who is leading Memphis Area Legal Services in an incredible way, really putting the community first, being bold in her strategies and her initiatives to bring equality to the community. Phyllis Aluko, who is heading the Shelby County Office of the Public Defender, who's also being proactive and making certain that her office is a change agent. She is laser focused on ensuring justice for all in the population that she serves. And Doris Holt, who is the federal defender in the Western District of Tennessee, who has always been a force unto herself, but is leading that office in very innovative, novel, and capable ways. And if you think about it, one of the threads that you heard in what I just said is that all of these leaders are women, and they are, in their own way, redefining justice by ensuring justice to all. April mentioned that I began my career in the Office of Legal Services. I had not planned that initially, but I was able to get that position and recognized early on that that position provided an opportunity to serve, to be a servant leader. We know that people in marginalized communities are often overlooked when it comes to goods and services, and they're overlooked when it comes to justice. And many of the people in those marginalized communities, those underserved communities, are people of color. About 6 decades ago, an organization called the National Conference of Christians and Jews conducted a survey to determine people's confidence in the court outcomes, confidence in the justice system. And they included criminal and civil. What they found at the end of that survey was overwhelmingly African Americans did not believe that they could get justice in courts, whether it was civil or criminal. They believed that the barrier of race, the barrier of white supremacy, the barrier of socioeconomic disparity would deny them an opportunity for justice in the courts. Next, people from the Latinx community didn't believe that they were likely to get a fair shake. They believed that it would be difficult for them to get justice in the court system. And following them were Asian Americans. Whites were the only group who consistently believed that they could get justice, and they had a reasonable expectation of getting justice in the court system, regardless of it being civil or criminal. At the time the conference did this, Native Americans were not included in the survey group. Now, about 10 or 12 years ago, that survey was repeated, not by the Christians and Jews Conference, but by, I believe, one of the leading research organizations. I'm not sure whether it was Pew or one of the others, but what they found was that the real research findings had not changed. When they did that survey, African Americans still expressed a lack of confidence in the ability to get justice in the courts. Now, that finding is an indictment on our justice system. And why am I saying that to you? Because you're on the front lines for this work. But all of us are stakeholders in the justice system. And if any individual believes that there's a barrier to their being able to receive justice, then that is a concern and a problem for all of us. And I commend you today for not just relying on what has been tried in the past, but on forging new strategies, on setting new goals, new outcomes, on holding all participants accountable in the cause of justice, because that is the only way that this will ever get done. I want to share with you a couple of comments about one of the main barriers that I see in the ability to get justice across the board. And this is not just in the courts, but it stems also from the community. Dr. Kerry Ressler, who is now at Harvard, did a study in Georgia on people who lived in high poverty, high violent, and high density communities. And as a result of his research, he found that individuals who live in prolonged periods in those communities have severe trauma, and they experience that severe trauma regularly. That constant state of trauma often affects an individual's ability to make decisions, to achieve their full potential. And you can't hold that individual responsible for that community. We in this country have forged communities that are disparate in so many ways. We allocate resources disparately based on the nature and extent of the community. And when it comes to children who live in those trauma-informed communities day in and day out, that impedes in many instances their ability to achieve their full potential. For an individual who lives in fight or flight mode constantly, they don't have the luxury oftentimes of being able to regroup and assess and really take the advantage of the kind of things that we know are indicators of success, being able to live a life where you don't have to fear every moment for your safety, being able to have the basic needs met on a regular basis, being able to walk into a job prospect and present your best self and have yourself evaluated only on the merits, the potential that you bring to that position. But that's where we are today. And our policymakers must embrace that reality and include that in the policies. And I know the people who are in legal services and the people who are in defender services, the people who are advocating across the board, understand and are making the case for change. When we look at the criminal justice section, the criminal justice system, or the criminal legal system, we know that there are myriad problems there that also affect people in the civil setting and people in communities. It often divides communities and denies individuals the fullest opportunity for their life chances. When we look at data behind America's criminal justice system, and we look at how race may impact different people's experiences, we as judges, jurors, and lawyers must admit that race plays an oversized and outsized role in that process, in often tainting the process of justice. It is a harsh truth, but it's one that we cannot ignore. These biases, these stereotypes, these disparities that are inherent and manifested in the system day in and day out cause tremendous disadvantage. And it is long-term and oftentimes lifelong disadvantage. If we think about in our communities, individuals who have an encounter with the criminal legal system, they can have a negative encounter. That single negative encounter, depending on the nature and scope of it, may influence that individual's civil life for the rest of their life. They may be denied an opportunity to take advantage of training, certain licenses, certain jobs, certain housing, certain family institutions and family relationships. All of those things may be impacted. And we have to ask ourselves, for a person who committed a crime 30 years ago, should that, and they've paid their debt to society, should that crime still be denying them the right to vote in 2021, 2022. What is the rationale behind that? We have to look institutionally, structurally, and systemically at some of the policies that are influencing decisions that are being made and influencing and defining individuals' life chances. Studies also indicate that these biases manifest themselves differently in different groups. We know that there is gender bias. We know that there is a religious bias. We know that there's bias against sexual orientation. But all of these biases don't affect groups equally. There are disparate impacts and outcomes in those different groups. And we can't just look at the courtroom. The courtroom and the legal system is a microcosm of the society at large. When we look at the criminal system, we know that while we have laws that speak eloquently to justice and just outcomes, bias may affect the course of those decisions. Think about, how does bias affect a person's right to confrontation? We've got rules that speak to that, but decisions about confrontation, the decisions about the extent to which an individual may cross-examine a witness can have detrimental effects and can be influenced by bias. The provision of Brady material by prosecutors can affect that. A person's ability to get an impartial jury trial can be affected. One of the examples I like to use that came from my days on the trial bench, the federal trial bench, and a federal defender, Doris Holt, is the person who gave me this rich example through her actions in court. She was about to try a person, about to defend a person accused of a drug crime in the federal system. And at that time, I, as a judge, conducted most of the voir dire, at least the preliminary, but then I allowed the prosecutor and the defense attorney to voir dire the panel directly. And I had done my voir dire, the prosecutor had done his, and they got some information from the panel. But Doris stepped into the well of the court and she asked the following question: how many of you know what a drug dealer looks like? Raise your hand. And all of the hands of the jurors in the panels went up. They each raised their hand to say, I know what a drug dealer looks like. She stopped and stood there to let this sink in. And as people realized what they were saying by their actions, you could see their hands slowly come down. Because in truth, none of us know what a drug dealer looks like. Drug dealers come in all genders, they come in all races, they come in different ages. But we have a stereotype that drives our thinking about who is and who is not, and thus who looks like a drug dealer. And when we say that the person sitting at that table, who happened to be a young African-American man who looked like he stepped right out of central casting for the role of drug dealer, when we say that this person fits our image, our picture of a drug dealer, how do we ensure that person has a fair trial based solely on the evidence? There are many other ways that we see things in the criminal legal system that impact the quality of justice and the whole process of justice. Well, what about the civil side? I'm involved in some research now that evaluates whether or not litigants in civil tort cases, whether their damage awards are affected by bias. We anecdotally believe we know the answer, but when it goes to empirical data, we don't really have that empirical data to support our assumptions, our beliefs, our perceptions. But we are trying to study that to find out the nature and extent of that bias. Because if an individual is valued less because of race or gender, then that affects the quality of justice overall. And we have to be better than that. As one who has taught extensively and lectured extensively about implicit bias, I know that some people say it's there, but people are people. We all have it, so there's nothing we can do about it. I reject that because I believe that we have an obligation to hold people accountable, to educate, to create awareness, and then help individuals to understand the nature and extent of those biases by encouraging them to take the IAT test, and then by calling it out when we see it. And calling it out when we see it doesn't mean that you have to necessarily get into a confrontational thing, but we can communicate with individuals based on what we see. And as I said before, we can't pretend that we don't see what we see or that we don't know what we know. We have to take those proactive steps. You know, my life began, as April told you, back in Olive Branch, Mississippi. And I'll tell you two stories from that. I was born before the case of Brown versus the Board of Education was decided. I was unborn when the initial case was filed. I was 3 years old when the court decided Brown won, 4 years old when they decided Brown 2. And we know that Brown was the law of the land with respect to race and education. But when I began school as a first grader, the fact that the Supreme Court had made that decision didn't really change anything in my community. Black students entered their educational journey in a two-room, in my community, in a two-room center block school, with grades 1 and 2 being in room 1 and grade 3 being in room 2. The kids who went to school at grade 4 and beyond went to the Black church across the cemetery, and it was a large one-room church. The teachers pulled pews together to form the space for the different grades. So the first 3 pews might be grade 4, the next 2 might be grade 5, and on and on and on. But all of the teachers taught in that single room. And Mississippi said, that's separate but equal. Of course, after Brown, they had to change, but they didn't do it immediately. It was not until 1966 that Mississippi began to desegregate its schools. And so for the first 10 years of my formal education, I was in a segregated Black school. Now, in 1959, Mississippi did build a Plessy compliant school. They built a school for the Black kids with classrooms. They still used the books that came down from the white school. They still had labs with no lab equipment. And they still had teachers who were paid at a much lower wage rate than their counterparts at the white school. Those kind of things systemically can lead to ingrained biases and discrimination and disparities. And while people say, oh, that was a long time ago, move on, we are still suffering from the legacy of that Jim Crow, of slavery, of systemic and legal discrimination, of denial of the right to vote, of denial of employment, equal opportunities in employment. We're still suffering from those things. And until we really deal with the basic infrastructure, then we will always be suffering from these problems of disparity. So I commend NLADA for its commitment to furthering equality, redefining justice, and really moving all communities forward. Every child has the right, I believe, to live and achieve their fullest potential. And every person ought to have access to courts and should have an expectation that they will receive justice according to the strength of their case, not the color or their race. When we as lawyers demand that we as a nation do better, it may take some time, but like water on stone, we will make that difference. I can tell you that from my humble beginnings, getting to where I am today, as you might imagine, has not been easy, but I have been and will continue to be persistent. In my school, even though we were allowed eventually to go to the white school, it was not an open embrace. We fought our way in, and we received that message at the beginning that we were not welcome. And so in Olive Branch High School, the white school where I went and where I graduated, the teachers, the principal, denied Black students information about colleges. They denied them the kind of career counseling that our white counterparts got. And they did not give us information about earned scholarships. And so even though I earned those scholarships, I was already graduated from college and law school, having practiced a couple of years and having gotten elected as judge before I ever learned that I had earned scholarships that would have helped me in my career goals early on, would have helped me be able to focus my energies and my efforts on education rather than trying to divide it between work and education. And many people today, because of systemic racism, are still having to divide their time. They're having to prioritize certain things and really limit their time to certain endeavors in order to make possible a life that gives meaning to themselves and their family. And in America, the richest nation, the richest country rather on the face of the planet, we are better than that, and we must do better than that. All of us have an obligation, I believe, to do better. As I get ready to close, let me just share with you that in the work that we do as lawyers, it is our task to hold all stakeholders accountable. It is for us to model, to lead, to change, to be change agents. When I first ran for judge, there had not been an African-American woman judge in the history of Tennessee. And I remember vividly going to a radio station to buy an ad for my campaign. My appointment was 4 o'clock, and I got there about 3:30 and went to the front desk and announced my presence. The two receptionists, two young white females at the front desk, asked me to take a seat out front. And I did. Now, I announced my name when I got there. And it was a room that had a semi partial partition up. And I sat on the outside, they were on the other side. But I could hear them talking. And as I sat waiting patiently, they were just engaging in small talk, nothing that related to me. But at about 10 of 4, I heard one of them say, "We only have one more person today, it's some Bernice Donald. And if she's not here by 4 o'clock, then we're closing." At that moment, I stood up and went on the other side of the partition and said, "Excuse me, I am Bernice Donald, and I am here. I've been here since 3:30. One of the young women looked at me and said, "You're Bernice Donald?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "You don't look like a judge." And I said, without missing a beat, "What's a judge supposed to look like?" And she said, "I don't know, but you don't look like one." And as I tell that story, I tell people that there was no malice in her statement. Her statement reflected the landscape of judges that existed at that time. They were mostly older. They were mostly white and male. There were 2 white female judges in Shelby County at that time. And I believe there were 3 African-American male judges at that time, but that was it. There had been no one who looked like me to serve on a bench. And so she rightfully had not seen that. But, when we encounter those situations where we are not in the picture, it is our obligation to repaint the picture. It is our obligation to be in places and in spaces so that other individuals can look at that space, can look at that picture and see themselves mirrored going forward. Modeling helps. Mentoring helps. Sponsorship helps. And it is fine to be a first, but I always want to say that being a first is only important to the extent that it allows for a second, a third, a fourth, and so on. And so all of us who are in these spaces, we have an obligation to reach back, to pull forward, to push forward. And just as we are standing on the shoulders of our ancestors, we must create space and strong shoulders for future generations to stand on so that they may see a future brighter than the one that we inherit and occupy right now. As we work to redefine justice. I wish you the best. I would ask everyone to lend their efforts to this cause, because as Dr. King said, the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And I would say to you that it doesn't bend of its own volition. It doesn't bend of any gravitational force. It only bends because men and women like you push and pull that arc in the direction of justice. It is through our effort, our energy, our vision that the arc will bend. I would ask you to, in the words of some musical group, I would urge you to keep on pushing and keep on pulling that arc in the direction of justice. Thank you so much, April, for inviting me to be here today to speak. And I wish everyone the best going forward. And I would say to you, whether you're in the defender's office or whether you're in civil legal aid, you're doing God's work, and do it with Godspeed. Thank you.
Mahalo nui, Judge Donald. So proud of, so honored to have you speak with us today. I'm inspired by your words, your graciousness, the fact that you've been in some of the first, and really the storytelling. I always appreciate the storytelling because that's where we learn and our lessons come from. So again, mahalo, mahalo, mahalo from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you.
To the National Legal Aid and Defender community, I welcome you again to the 2021 annual conference. Aloha mai kākou. My name is Nalani Fujimori Kaina, and I'm a board member with the NLADA and chair of the Strategic Issues Committee, which oversees this conference. I'm also proud to serve as the executive director with the Legal Aid Society of Hawaii. In this conference's hybrid nature, I have the honor of closing this opening plenary from the land of my ancestors, the Kanaka Maoli. I am coming to you as the sun rises from the Mokupuni of Oahu, the Moku of Ko'olaupoko, the Ahupua'a of Waimanalo, and the Ili of Mauna Lua. In coming to you from Hawaii this morning, I recognize the gift that I've been given to cross the ocean and continent without leaving my home. To have a few moments to speak with you all about the places where we are that are so remarkable, and our participation from across the country reflects the tapestry that can only amplify the work that we do. And yes, I realize that I'm coming to you from Hawaii, but each place where we exist has its own rhythm and heart that we can feel at the core of our soul. And it drives the work that we do as justice advocates. Otherwise, why would we do it? There's a Hawaiian olelo no eawa proverb, "Ilea ka hula I ka ho'opa'a." The hula is pleasing because of the drummer. It means that the lesser details are just as important as the major ones. While people may pay attention to the hula dancer, the drummer and chanter also play an important role in the dance. And in reflecting on the fact that we have gathered here from all over the country, I have thought that the places that I've been fortunate to visit, of the places that I've been fortunate to travel to. In each of the places that I've gone, if you stop for just a moment, you can feel the energy, you can feel the place. And if you listen deeply enough, you can also feel the history. And while my experiences in all of these places are merely perceptions caught in a moment of time, for each of you, the places and people that you serve is much more ingrained as you listen and learn each day. At some moment this week, I really ask you to step away from your computer, to step outside if you can, to feel the air, whether it be warm or cold, to listen to the leaves and the birds, or to the cars and the trains, or to the footsteps of hurry and purpose. Continue to listen beyond what is the loudest. Start to hear the quieter sounds and the silence that's in between. In doing so, you will start to feel the rhythm, the diversity, the difference in each of our worlds and each of our experiences and how it impacts our perspectives. It is from this place that I ask you to reflect on the theme of this year's annual conference, Redefining Justice. To redefine justice to me means to make it to work for those who are the heartbeat of my community, for whom the rhythm may or may not work for, and for the voices we may need to seek under the loudest of noises. As we look to redefine justice, we must take into account each of our stories and our perspectives and their impact on the stories of our clients and their perspectives. within the context of a system that was not built for them. We must seek justice even when the system may be pushing back. We must find ways to bring light and bring hope to those most impacted by the pandemic. And we must generate change through ongoing perseverance, even when it tires us out. As justice advocates, it is our time to redefine justice. We hope that this year's conference programming brings you the inspiration, the time for self-reflection, and the space to redefine justice. Kulia i kanu'u, strive to the highest. Mahalo for joining us, and enjoy the conference. Thank you so much.